What's going on, guys? This is Danny from Slow Restoration, and today we're gonna actually do a rear disc brake conversion kit on this 1967 C10. But the interesting thing is it does have a Buick Grand National rear end in it, rear end housing in it. So another interesting thing is Wilwood does not make a disc brake conversion kit for the Buick Grand National. So what we're gonna use, this can work, it does work. We're going to use part number 140-12964. It's for the 10 12 bolt GM rears. So we'll set that over here, and the very first thing we need to do is some disassembly, and I'll show you why they don't make a kit for it and what we need to do to make this kit work. As you can see, we have it up on the lift. We'll go ahead and pull our drum off here. This is all new. This is an extremely nice truck, but it is drum brake. So we have our drum off now. We do have it drain pan, and we did drain the rear differential fluid. As you can see, we let that drain for a while, and that is because we do have to pull the axles to get these backing plates off. And to do that, these are C-clip rears, so the C-clips have to come out, so you have to drain and disassemble there, get the C-clip out, pull this axle out of the housing. Before we get that far into that though, if you come on the back side here, we'll come over to this side. As you can see off of the tube, so the housing end, there's two threaded screws with bolts coming through from the brake side down here. And there's nothing up top except for this large bolt, and that holds the shoes from rotating. There is no third and fourth bolt hole there. So pretty much what we have to do is enlarge these two holes, use our new backing plate as a template, drill the two upper holes, and cut the top of this off. It's too big, it's in the way, and there's just nothing. Wilwood does not offer a kit that's direct bolt on. Even if they did, you would have to modify this anyway because it's too big for the park brake shoes to fit inside. And speaking of the park brake shoes, here is our new park brake emergency brake setup. I guess they call it a parking brake. But there is the 4 bolt holes I was talking to you about. The lower two should match up to what's on the housing. We'll just have to open them up a little bit. And these upper two are what we need to mark and drill. So if you're doing this kit on your Buick Grand National, I know it's kind of a little bit intimidating because you can't ever, well, I guess you could go back to stock. You could weld that piece back on, but probably if you're making that modification, you're not really looking to keep your Grand National 100% stock. You're looking for better performance out of the braking system, and these Wilwood disc brakes will be way better than these old drums. By the way, I just did a front disc brake conversion kit on this too, and this particular truck does have a 2nd gen F-body subframe under it, so 2nd gen F-body Wilwood disc brake kit video is up also. So if you need to check that out, or you need information on that, definitely check that out. Once we have our rear differential cover off, to get these C-clips out, probably most of you know this, but you need to remove that bolt. We need to remove our cross pin and get access to those C-clips. 8mm bolt. We slip this out. It's a stud with a shoulder on it, or a long shank, and threads on it. Once we have that out, we can actually kind of reach through, and we'll pull this cross pin out. Once we have that cross pin out, we'll come over here and we'll actually push in on the axle, and oh, I heard it. Yep, fell out. So here's our C-clip. Here's our passenger side C-clip. We'll store that down here with the rest of our parts. Same thing with the other side. We'll push in on the axle. They don't always fall out like that. You might have to use a magnet and pull them out. But try to avoid spinning this because it will make your spider gears and that stuff move around. There's shims and washers and stuff in there. So once we have those C-clips out, we can just take and pull our axles back out. As you can see, that's why it's important to run C-clip eliminators if you're drag racing, because if your axle breaks, your end of your axle is going to come right off along with your wheel. And we can go ahead and slip that axle the whole way out. Grab it like this. With the axles out of the way, now we can continue to disassemble this setup here. Again, the whole backing plate's going, the whole brake system's going, your e-brake cable, all that's coming out. So when you get done, you'll have your axle housing end and the flange that needs to be modified. So we'll take these two bolts out. It appears to be 10 millimeters, and we'll disassemble the top part of these shoes and unbolt that top stud. With that disassembled, we have these two bolts out. We have the large nut off the back side here. So we did take our park brake cable loose and also disconnected the brake line from the wheel cylinder itself. So this should pull right out. Now we can get a really good look. Like I said, you end up with the housing end, the flange, and again, this flange is wrong, but we can modify it to make it work. As I was disassembling it, this bolt did break. We're not concerned with it because we have to drill these out and retap them for a larger size anyway. All right, we went ahead and put some tape over the housing end. We do have to modify that housing flange, so we don't want shavings or grinding dust to get in there. So we went ahead and taped that. We do have our backing plate assembly with the park brake. And there is a left and a right. As you can see, there's a bracket. When this is on, you want that bracket to face forward. If we put this on here, we can't go flat against the flange because of that bracket until we trim that. But as you can see, these bottom holes do line up. The top holes are the ones we want to mark, and we're just getting a reference. So if we pull that back off, they're roughly going to be right there and right there. There is a kind of a machined surface here. We're definitely going to be below that. And with that trimmed off, as you can see, we just rough cut that off. We didn't quite go to the bottom there. I wanted to make sure there was a little bit more bulk, but we have that trimmed off. Now we should be able to test that backing plate and mark those upper holes. And just like that, if we slip that on and line up these bottom two holes, the top holes are covered. There's not a lot of material, as you'll notice after I get drilled, but there is enough to make this work. I'm actually going to make this easy, and I have a transfer punch. It's got a point on it, but it's also the same size as this hole. So I can start it in that hole and just tap it with a hammer, and it makes a perfect center punch in the middle of that hole. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and drill these bottom two holes out, and we'll put a nut and bolt in there and make this tight so we can mark our top. So you're supposed to reuse your factory hardware mounting that backing plate. We don't have any because that housing end didn't have these two top holes at all, and the bottom two were smaller. So we're going to use 3/8 hardware. I have a 3/8 drill pit. We'll go ahead and open these. With those two bottom holes opened up to 3/8, we can take our backing plate, slip it back on there. With that bolted on there, we'll take our transfer punch, slip it in the hole here, just give it a little tap. Transfer to the other hole. Now we have perfectly aligned holes to drill. All right, with our perfectly aligned transfer holes here, we'll take I'm going to use a 1/16 inch pilot bit, and we'll drill through with that. And we'll step up to a 1/4 inch, and we'll finish it off with a 3/8 drill. And with those opened up, as you can see, we have our backing plate back on here with the 3/8 bolts at the bottom and through holes now at the top. So if we pull that back off, you can see we have plenty of meat still there. We can go ahead and clean this top up. We'll grind it smooth, radius that off, just make it look a little better. Make sure it's not, there is some spots on the back here. Those two small bolts that are protruding. Make sure they're not hitting up top here. And again, just touch it up, make it look a little better. It's not going to affect anything if you didn't touch it up, but I'm going to make it polish it a little bit, radius those sharp edges, and then we'll touch that up with a little bit of paint, and we'll be ready to bolt this on, and then we can actually slip our axles back in. With that housing cleaned up a little bit and touched up with some black paint, like I said, you're not really going to see any of that because this is all going to sandwich over top, but just you know, make it look a little bit better and break the sharp edges. So the next step is we actually take our backing plate and we bolt the caliper mounting bracket on along with the spacer. So this spacer is going to change depending on which offset axles you have. So that might change for your configuration. You do have to measure that, but this is the one they sent with it, so we're going to give this one a shot and see how close it is. I think this is the 2.75 inch offset assembly here. 3 bolts, washers, the spacer. They do give shims. Again, like the front, you do have to space this because it's a non-floating caliper. We'll get to that in a second, but for right now, that's kind of how it goes. If we spin this around, as you can see, the caliper is going to mount directly off the back of this assembly. We're going to go ahead and assemble the rotor and hat assembly here. You have a bunch of these small bolts with a washer, and if you look, there is holes drilled through them. That's for safety wiring them later after you get them installed. These go in with Loctite and get torqued to 155 inch-pounds. With those in there and torqued, you're going to want to torque them every other one and then come back and hit every other one again till you have them all torqued. But again, 155 inch-pound, they are small bolts. You do 155 foot-pounds, you're going to snap every one of them. So definitely don't do that. So with that done, we have a nice hat rotor assembly here. We got our backing plate bolted on there. We did use 3/8/24 grade 8 hardware. That's firmly on there. Now we can go ahead and slide our axle back in. Now we can slip our axles back, being careful to align the spider gears up in the center. There we go. We'll push that all the way in. We'll get the other side installed, then we'll put the C-clips in. All right, and to put the C-clips back in, like I said, you push the axle in. You look up in there, it's going to be impossible to show on this GoPro. There's a groove at the end of the axle. You're going to push the axle in, hold the C-clip up in there, and just pull out on the axle until it goes back into the side spider gear and locks it in place. Once it's locked in place, as you can see, you can't pull out on the axle anymore. Now we'll just take and reinstall that cross pin. We'll Loctite that bolt and go ahead and torque that bolt down with a cross pin, hold that all together. With that cross pin all locked back in, we're done inside there. Well, we should be. We did run into a slight issue. This kit is designed to work off the 2.75, so 2 3/4 inch offset, and that offset is from the outside of the axle flange, or not the axle, the axle housing flange to the outside of the axle flange. So if we take a measurement on this one, it is 2.57, which is not the 2-inch 750, which would be there. So as you can see, we have a little bit of a difference there. And what that does is, actually I did pull that wheel off, but I think I can show you better with this setup here. So we have, of course, the bracket that holds the caliper itself. We have a spacer here, and this spacer is for that 2.75 inch offset. That is the smallest offset they offer for this kit, the 10-12 bolt kit. Again, we are retrofitting this. I did talk to Wilwood because of that spacer, because of the smaller offset, so not as much axle protruding, we would actually need a bigger spacer here. And what that does is it puts leverage in, different leverages in places where it really shouldn't have it. So I think after talking to them, the best course of action here is to go ahead and swap out the axles for this application. Some of your Grand Nationals will have that correct, actually from what I understand, most of your Grand Nationals will have that correct 2.75 offset. They do offer more offset, so less spacer, but they don't offer less offset, more spacer, because like I said, it does put more leverage on all the hardware here, and that's not necessarily a good thing when you're talking about braking. So as far as Grand Nationals, you don't really know until you get into it. You can get your measurement beforehand, but we went with this kit because it's the only kit that kind of retrofit, has that size brake we were looking for, and it's a kit that you can retrofit, modify the flange and make work, but the axle offset is what it is. So we're actually going to go ahead and get some axles, aftermarket axles, and then at that point we can make that 2.75 offset, and our kit will work without modifying it at all. The kit itself is not modified at all, you just have to modify that axle tube flange to make it work. So once we get our axles, all of this will bolt on just like it should. Definitely take your time and make measurements, and order your axles compared to what you actually need. What we did here is actually we put spacers behind the rotor and the axle to simulate a longer axle, and all that works perfect. As you can see, we have our pads in here, all that lines up, so we are good to go there. We have the measurements we need, we just need our new axle. Another thing worth mentioning, these Grand Nationals, again, they probably could have came either way, but typically they are metric axles. So this hole here, this boss here that locates your wheel or your drum or whatever, is a metric size. Your lug nuts these are 12 millimeter. So Wilwood does recommend swapping to 1/2 inch lug nuts, and you can. Here is the rotor, and the ring just fell out. Let me grab it. So this is the ring they supply to. This ring is changeable if you have different size axles, which we do in this case. So if we put that on there, you can see how that moves around a little bit on there. We can buy different rings to make this work, but when we order our new axles, we'll just make it for this size ring, which is a standard 10-12 bolt size. So kind of in conclusion of this is, if you have that 2.75 offset, you can make your stock axles work just fine. If you don't, if it's less, then the best bet is to just swap out your axles. If you're doing this, you're upgrading anyway. So in this case, we're just going to upgrade to aftermarket axles with the right dimensions. So that was kind of a mouthful, but this kit does work, of course, as you can see, with a Grand National rear end housing. You can make it work, and to finish it up, you pretty much only have to finish torquing these bolts, these 3 bolts here. You may have to shim them. They supply shims to get this completely centered. Once you have that centered, torqued down, use Loctite on those, then you're just going to shim your caliper here out. It goes in and out a little bit, and you're just setting your height for your pads pretty much. So once you have your caliper shimmed out so your pad is even with the end of the rotor, you're good to go there. You can put the nut and washer, torque these down, and at that point it's just a matter of bleeding your brakes. Here is the hardware that actually goes on and holds your caliper on. So we have some washers and some 12-point nuts there to get torqued down. So I would rather have this completely finished up and show you the whole finished product, but the rest of it is just mounting that caliper like we talked about, and that's easy to do. If you've gotten this far, you can definitely handle doing that. The hard part is this axle flange modifying that to make this kit work, and then making sure your measurement here is correct. Again, if in this case we are going to do aftermarket axles, if your Grand National housing is that 2.75 offset, you don't need to. You can adapt this kit the rest of the way to work by changing out the lug nuts and that register. And Wilwood does have that stuff in stock. The guys at Wilwood were very helpful in figuring this out, and it may not be the answer you want to hear at first, but in the end, it is the correct answer. The best way of fixing this without modifying the brake kit is just swapping the axles. So they were very helpful in figuring out this solution for this problem. This is not a direct bolt-on because you are modifying the axle housing. They don't offer a direct kit for a Grand National, but this one, like I said multiple times, does work. In this case, we do have to change the axles, but it's just an upgrade that this truck probably deserves anyway. So now we are waiting for axles to come in so we can finish this up. But like I said, that side is how it will look. The offsets are correct with the shimming. So we're good to go there. And we got more to come on this build. We're doing a lot more to it. We already did the front disc brake conversion, so go ahead and check that out if you need to. And of course we did the rear. We are doing, we're pulling the transmission, putting the stall converter in it. We're putting a cam in this. It does have an LQ9 LS motor in it. So the PRC head's already on it, but it has a stock cam. So we're pulling the cam out, putting a Texas speed cam in it, changing the intake, and doing a bunch of other small things to this truck, along with wheels and tires also. So thanks for stopping by. Have a good day.